Mickey Dickey here, giving you my weekly, and in this particular case, monthly update. And I'm also going to give you my stocks that I'm looking for next week. And again, the stocks I'm going to give you here are stocks that I'm looking for trends. These are not stocks I'm suggesting that you buy or sell or do anything with. So for the month of April, the NASDAQ ended up 0.04%. We ended the week up 1.28%. The S&P ended the week up 0.87%, and for the month 1.46%, and the Dow ended up 0.86%, and for the month 2.4%. And what that does is it gives us for the year to date 16.8, 8.5, almost 8.6 on the S&P, and 2.8 for the Dow. Now again, we've been looking at these trends, and this is exactly what we're wanting to see. Is the Dow going up a little bit, the S&P more, and the NASDAQ even more. What would be an interesting trend is if the month of May, the NASDAQ ended up being up a solid return. I'm not sure if that's going to happen or not, but that would be an interesting trend if it does. Same kind of thing for the S&P. But one of the trends we were also looking at in the past is, can we stay above the 20% mark for the NASDAQ? So we finished the month off very solidly there. So again, another trend that's going in the right direction that we want to see. So for the stocks for next week, you got VRTX, you've got ON, you've got MGM, you've got Avis, you've got Norwegian Cruise Lines, which Norwegian's an interesting deal. It really hasn't come back as much as airlines and some of the other travel, which is interesting to me. Because if you look at the numbers, it was back, at one point, it was back up to $30 a share, and it didn't have a boat in the water. And each quarter it seems to be doing better and better, and yet the stock just doesn't go anywhere. Same thing with Royal Caribbean, and the same thing with Carnival Cruise Lines. So it's going to be interesting to see how the quarter actually transpires and what the CEO comes out and says as far as guidance going forward. And again, more importantly, how does the market respond to this? You've got a water company, AWR, and then you've got Chegg, which Chegg has an AI system. And those of you who don't know what Chegg is when my son was going to college, it's where he got his books from. There's also a monthly subscription to it, and supposedly they're going to be integrating AI into that. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes out. On Tuesday, you've got Pfizer, you've got Starbucks, you've got Eaton, you've got Ford, you've got Welltower. Now, those of you who don't know what Welltower is a REIT, mainly in the nursing home, healthcare facility business, which one of the things I find interesting about this particular REIT is how the market looks at it, because it seems to just follow what the REITs are doing overall. And yet when I look at REITs, it's one of those that I'm really not that concerned about its future. During COVID, it crashed because people were thinking that everybody in nursing homes was dying. Okay, so that's one different part of it. But it's an industry that just continues to grow and grow. So yes, I know there's probably somewhat of a concern with financing because of interest rates going up and everything being most commercial real estate stuff. But again, I don't see the issue here. So it's going to be interesting to me to see if it continues to outperform as far as top line, bottom line, and guidance, and if it just continues to get crushed in the overall REIT market. Then you've got Clorox, you've got Coors Beer, which I think the Coors Beer is going to be interesting because of what's been happening with Budweiser. So it'll be interesting to see if they've seen any big uptick and if they've seen a big inflow and if they think that's going to continue and stay. Sun is Sunoco, which those of you who don't know what Sunoco is, it has a bunch of gas stations with mini marts. It's going to be interesting to see how they're doing. They've got a pretty high dividend. It's an LP, so keep an eye on that. And that's why I like that section. The first thing that we want to talk about on Wednesday is going to be Powell. Now, he doesn't speak until 2:30. The interest rate will come out at 2 o'clock, but he doesn't speak till 2:30. So it's really the 2:30 issue that comes around. So it'll be interesting to see what he says and whether he's going to raise interest rates a quarter. I think the consensus is he's going to raise interest rates a quarter. And the bigger question is, how does the market take it? Because in theory, what should be happening is if he's raising rates, it's got to be near the end. And we have to be closer to the end than the beginning. So the market should actually make it a positive. And yet the last several times, it really kind of hasn't gone that way. So let me see what happens there. And if he hints that they're done. Now, I personally don't think he will. I think he's going to come out and just raise rates, say that there's still more stuff to do, and if the market takes it like it did last June, could be an interesting next 60 days. Because the following week, you've got CPI coming out, PPI coming out. And as we've talked about before, given the fact that gas is still down over 12% year over year, now it did go up month over month, but when you look at it year over year, it's still going to be down. It should make the CPI go down at least 0.5%, if not more, which means we should be in the 4.5 or under range, which means, and then when the May print comes out, which should be down at least a 15 or 18% again, we should lose another 0.5% to get us under 4. And when the June print comes out, again, because last year was the big number at 5% or $5 a gallon, we should be down significantly again. And then August is the same. We don't really stabilize on the gasoline front until September. And I know I keep beating this like a dead horse, but it's very possible we could be in the 3% inflation range by August. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how the market takes this going forward. So the stuff I'm looking at on Wednesday is CVS. You've got Estee Lauder. You've got Kraft Heinz. Gold, which this is an interesting play here, because gold, this is the mining company, not just gold itself, and has a decent dividend. It hasn't really done as well as the gold in and of itself, so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. You've got Etsy, and I'm going to do this one wrong, and I always get the name wrong on this, so bear with me. It's Generac. Sorry, I just don't know how to pronounce the name, so I apologize. But it was a darling during COVID, it went crazy, and it's just been crushed. Now, part of it's just because of the earnings per share. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Tandem's another one you guys probably may not know about. Now, Tandem diabetes is for people who have type 1 diabetes, which means they were born with it. And one of the interesting parts of Tandem, especially during COVID, and I kept saying this about because the stock got crushed during COVID, it's been crushed now, which is baffling to me, because during COVID, people were saying not to do a company like Tandem because of COVID, no one could go get it. And what didn't make any sense is that if you have type 1 diabetes, you have to have your diabetic medicine. You have to have that. And if you don't get it, you will die. Now, not just COVID, but anything else, you might possibly get COVID and you might possibly die from it. But again, if you don't get your insulin, you will die. There's no question about it. So the Tandem is a fantastic pump. So it's been crushed, and part of it is just the fact that if you look at the numbers, it was a growth stock that the PE ratios didn't make any sense from the people that were talking about PE ratios. Again, this is a newer company. It's a younger company. It doesn't really have a PE ratio. It's all about the growth going forward. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how some of these growth stocks that, again, may not be profitable yet, but are continuing to grow, and see how they perform, and again, how the market reacts to their performance. GoGo, same thing. It's a very young company, smaller company, does all the in-flights. Interesting how that goes. Kratos, and again, I might be pronouncing that wrong. They're a small company like a Raytheon or Lockheed, so they're in defense, but they're small, but they're more tech-oriented. So again, it's one of these growth companies that hasn't done well during, even though Lockheed and Northrop Grumman have done very well because of the Ukraine, this one really hasn't. So I'm going to be interested to see how this goes out. Then you've got Del Monte, you've got Ruger Guns, and then the last one is Ameren. And Ameren's an interesting company. It's just gone through a whole nother change. It's a very small company, and it has a drug for those people who cannot take a statin. Statins hurt people in their joints. They need the cholesterol drug, so they try to get the right statin for them. Ameren's one of these drugs that you can take in connection with a statin, and because it's a fish oil based, it helps with the pain. And if you still can't take statins, you can take it by itself. But this is a company a couple of years ago where the management just totally screwed up. They have a great drug, and a lot of people need it, but they weren't willing to pay off basically the generics, and lost a lawsuit. And then we can debate all day long whether the lawsuit should have been won or lost. But the fact is it did get lost. But it should never have gotten to that point where they had to have a lawsuit and hope that a judge does the right thing. So anyway, they've got a new board, they've got a new CEO, they've got a bunch of new things coming. So it's going to be interesting to see how this thing goes, because they've lost over 50% of their market. Originally, they were expecting it to get bought out, and it just never happened. So Thursday, we've got Apple, and then we've got Budweiser. It'll be interesting how that comes out. Booking.com. Now, AEP is an electric company, and I'm interested in electric companies, and you'll notice on Friday I've got Enbridge and Dominion as well. Again, electric companies. They haven't really done exceedingly well, which is interesting to me because they're a utility. So whether we have a recession, we don't have a recession, with all the grid being built out, and you would expect this to be a bigger deal. And maybe it's because they're spending a lot of money building out a grid that it's a concern. Not really, but again, I'm interested to see how these companies are actually doing versus what they're expected to do. And then more importantly, how does the market respond to that? Then you've got Square, and then you've got Kellogg, you've got Datadog, and then you've got Royal Caribbean. So again, you've got Norwegian back here, and then you've got Royal Caribbean. So this might be one of those weeks, again, I'm looking for trends here, that if Norwegian is let's say it comes out and everything's great and the market responds in a positive way to it, and Royal Caribbean does the same thing, this could be one of those interesting weeks with them. Paramount Global, Expedia, then you've got Stanley Black & Decker, DraftKings, Cedar Fair, so Cedar Point, Carvana, and Redfin. So and again, Friday you've got Warner Brothers, and you get Enbridge and Dominion, electric companies. So the interesting part of all of this next week is there is a ton of variety. Starbucks to CVS to Etsy to Norwegian to Chegg. There's just a ton of data to go through here. Again, I'm interested to see the trends. So far this quarter, we have seen the vast majority of companies beat on their gross sales, beat on their net profit, and give pretty darn good guidance. And again, I'm not saying there weren't a couple that came out and tanked it, but as a whole, we did very well. Now, some of you will say that this happened because we lowered expectations. Okay, to some extent we did, but not all of them. But in general, I see very positive things coming out. So if next week ends up being the same, now let's say Bud doesn't do well. That has nothing to do with the economy, okay? So that's why I've got Coors and Bud in here, because it's very possible that Bud might have a bad quarter because of some publicity and some things that are going on. And again, I'm not getting the political part of this. I'm just looking at it from an investor standpoint. And it's very possible that Coors might be reaping some profits on it. So it might be a situation where Bud Light missed out on, let's say, $10 million in sales, and Coors might be up $10 million in sales. So in general, it's balanced itself out. So I wouldn't take either one of those by themselves. And I would take a group, but the rest of these. We had a couple of banks last week that didn't do what they were supposed to do. But all in all, you look at Microsoft, you look at Facebook, you look at Google. All those were really good quarters. And some of them did very well. Some of them didn't. The market did not react real well to the Google deal or Amazon, which I'm going to do a video on Amazon here in a little bit. So follow me on that. So in general, this is what I'm looking for next week. It's going to be an interesting week because of what's going on. April was an interesting month, and I think it ended up being a lot better than we anticipated. And for the year, 16% on the NASDAQ, 8.5% on the S&P, and almost 3% on the Dow. Now, granted, we were down significantly on these, but it's a nice return. If we could have May can end up being what we think it's going to be, this could be a very solid year in the scheme of things. That's my 2 cents worth. Talk to your financial advisor. Make sure that your portfolio is set up for your long-term goals and objectives so that you can retire when you want to retire. Dickie out.